And now I have the pleasure of introducing our wonderful instructors for the evening. Micah Kraus is an artist and educator living in Akron, Ohio. He operates Work Studio Limited, an art and design studio specializing in printmaking-based processes for fine art and client-based projects. Kraus has shown in solo and select group exhibitions regionally and nationally. He has engaged in community-based public art projects through organizations like East Akron Community House, Lock 3 Summer Arts Experience, Dora 2 Studios, Summit Art Space, Akron Art Museum, Lululemon Athletica, and Fleet Feet Cleveland. A former art instructor at Archbishop Hoban High School, Kraus has led students in the development of artistically expressive skills for more than 21 years. His students engage with arts professionals in the Akron area and are recognized in regional and national art competitions. Micah Kraus has a BA in art education and an MA in printmaking from Kent State University. And then we have Nicole Kurtz, an artist dedicated to using her skills to help others get the most out of their education. She has worked as an exhibition designer, forensic animator for The Courtroom, developer of card games, and as a scientific illustrator on research ships. Her passion lies in figuring out the best way to visually communicate complex topics with humor. Nicole lives in Austin, Texas, where she operates Educate Digital. She translated her instructional design and brand marketing experience into a successful business for the service support industry. Her primary focus in healthcare providers assisting children on the autistic spectrum. Learn more about Nicole at educatedigital.com. Thank you both so much for being here this evening. And now I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I will say that Micah was my art teacher in high school and has been my loudest cheerleader for all these years.
Easy to cheer for, that's for sure. No, it's awesome to be able to team up for this, and it's been really fun to work on it together. And I think we'll just jump in. So thank you very much, Natalie. It's awesome to be a part of this. And the class that I participated in 2 weeks ago, the financial literacy for artists, was just incredible. So hopefully we'll be able to shed similar value to you all. I think I can speak for Nicole in saying that this is completely participatory. So that means that if you have a question at any point or a comment, please do not hesitate to chime in. Using the emojis on here will help us see, but please feel free to jump in. But also at the same time, if you're not comfortable, interacting in that way, that's completely fine. So at the times that we do some conversation or ask for some feedback, if that's not your jam, that's totally cool. The chat is something that I know I will completely forget about. So if there's something on the chat, Natalie or anyone, please flag that. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And we'll use a slide deck that Nicole and I put together to kind of guide us through the process. And let me get down here. Cool. All right. Is that visible to all? Awesome. So for this presentation, when Natalie and Heather approached us about it, the general idea was to talk about marketing basics for artists. And we both agreed that it's important to consider kind of how you're presenting yourself or how you're introducing yourself to the market as an artist and as an art business. And so stepping away from even the word marketing so much, but talking about framing the narrative, framing the story of who you are and what your work is about, was something that we saw as kind of a focal point, and maybe demystifies the marketing thing a little bit. Also removing it from the corporate realm of marketing. So our goal here tonight, or a kind of pace that we're going to go through, is to first start by looking at some personality archetypes, because we're then going to use those in 3 sets of case studies that we've organized. Each of us have an example within those 3 categories of a business or a system that presents marketing or narrative construction in its own way. And then we'll have an opportunity as well to have you see if you can determine your own personality archetype. Again, towards the end. And then also in that third section, we have resources prepared that you'll be able to carry on in your own time and access that maybe drill down a little bit more on some of the things that we're talking about in our presentation. This is going back to my Hoban teaching days, the old essential questions, but 3 guiding questions for us, things that should compel greater thought and conversation. So what is your story? And the story thing is a bit overused, but I do think it's really critical as an artist, because the artistic pursuit, especially being a professional artist, is not something that happens in the blink of an eye. It's a long path. It's a winding road, and many things happen along the way. And so considering that, and then considering if you want that to be part of the narrative that you share with people is something that we want to address. How do you want to be known? What are those words that you'd like to have describe you? How do you want people to talk about you or talk about your work? And kind of starting at the end, if you know how you'd like people to think of you or talk about your work, maybe you can construct your marketing plan to lead towards that destination. And finally, what can you do to frame the narrative of your artistic practice? So what are some of the tools and infrastructure that exist already that you can use to get that message out there? Things that fit your lifestyle and your kind of pace of play, your comfort zone, and shaping those tools so that they share your story, your knowns. So I'll hand it over to Nicole.
I think we skipped a slide. Can you go back?
Oh, yep. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of a marketing perspective, it's really funny how it's very similar, especially right now with, the influx of social media influencers and everything. In order to really connect with your target audience, you need to have that authentic messaging, and that comes from your story. That comes from, the how you got here, how that influences your artwork, how that influences then the service you provide for people if you are working as a business, or the product. And so the way brands, businesses really craft this messaging is to utilize carefully crafted user personas. And that's a way to connect on this really emotional level with the target audience they're trying to attract. So for example, if you hear the brands Nike or Apple, I think we can all think pretty clearly on who that target audience is. Somebody who is a Nike user, is probably a little bit competitive. They're going after those athletes, the people who want to prove their worth, who really so they would be the hero archetype, the people who would like to leave a mark on the world. Whereas Apple, they're more trying to attract people who are creative space, people who aren't just going to buy the iPhone, but also get the MacBook and also the AirPods and the whole lifestyle aspect of it. So Nike and Apple, the reason why we as outside people can identify their target base so well is because Nike and Apple and brands like that have really worked at creating this emotional connection to their target audience. They've formed this image, a desired image in the customer's mind. So they utilize stereotypes, and stereotypes can be positive or negative, but ultimately it's there to boil down and kind of generalize our really basic motivations. So what do we want? What do we need? What are our fears, anxieties, things like that? And then brands sort of craft their whole messaging to tap into that. So as Mike has mentioned, there are these personality archetypes. There are 12 of them that we will identify in this presentation. There might be more, but these are kind of the basic ones. And again, it's kind of tapping into those generalizations or stereotypes that we know from childhood. The first one here, I was going to walk through them pretty quickly, but if you were to think about someone who would be described as an innocent person. They're hopeful and optimistic, maybe a little bit naive, childlike. They don't like doing things wrong. They like to keep things pretty simple. And then if you compare that to somebody who would be described as the hero, that's pretty different, right? You know, the hero would, again, be that Nike person, that competitive sort of athlete. And then the regular guy is somebody who is unpretentious and humble, likes to be on the same level as the consumer. So you can go to the next slide.
Maybe.
Yeah, okay. So Dove is an example of a brand that really leans into this innocent archetype. You know, even in this slogan here, whatever the damage of your hair. So they're really playing into that self-care, optimism sort of. It doesn't matter what went wrong, as long as you use our product, you can find the solution, which, you know, obviously is a ridiculous statement. But you know, it is kind of tapping into this childlike self-care kind of aspect. So you can move on to the next one. Do you want to take this slide? Do you want me to?
Sure. Yep. And I guess a question for you, Nicole, as we're moving into these, is it fair to say that most people are kind of a potpourri of these archetypes, but maybe have certain things that rise to the top, are most prominent in their
Yeah, and
behaviors?
we'll kind of get into that into the case studies. I feel like, well, I think we both have a lot of examples how maybe our personal archetype might need to be shifted when you're using it as your brand archetype. You know, and there's lots of overlap within these 12. But yeah, definitely, nobody is as, you can't be boiled down to one statement. Obviously, we're all kind of pretty dynamic and complex creatures.
In looking at this slide, you know, I think a lot of people might assume that the people that are in this session tonight would all gravitate towards the creator. And although the creative drive is something that is necessary for an artist, that may not be who you are in terms of your personality. Like, for instance, when I was looking through these initially, it was like, oh, I'm probably much more like the innocent. My natural state is to assume I'm in trouble in some way. So, and the fear of that, caregiver, being someone that wants to protect people and create a safe environment, is something that I'd probably gravitate to before the kind of visionary, nonconformist, authentic, new ideas. That kind of trailblazer attitude is someone that's looking forward. And again, reflecting this on myself, which I hope you guys will do as well as we're looking at these for yourselves. I would much rather be the second or third or fourth people going down the blazed trail and thinking about, oh, what if we go left or right here instead of following the trail? But I'm not probably going to be the person that clears the path. So I think it's important to consider, you know, as we kind of mill down in ourselves a little bit, who we might be. So the explorer craves adventure and wants to discover the world for themselves, that independence, but also kind of the spiritual rootedness, I think, is a really interesting, complex characteristic. Like a person that would eat ketchup, so adventurous, right? But the caregiver, this idea of these slow moments, giving grandma a big ketchup kiss on the cheek, but hearkening, when you see that bottle, the goal is to hearken back to those summer picnics and those family gatherings and so on. So there's a sensory reaction. And that's something we're going to look at later on when it comes to the idea of thinking about constructing an exhibition, using that as a metaphor for building your marketing plan or your business plan. How do you engage the senses of people in order to walk away from the experience of seeing your work impacted on levels beyond just the visual art, assuming you're a visual artist? Oop, I skipped one. There we go.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing to kind of keep in mind with these personality, these are the frameworks you can use to start conveying a message, and just like the way you communicate with people will draw a certain type of audience, and you'll find in our case studies sometimes that attracts audiences or projects that are a little more emotionally draining than you want it to be, and so that's kind of what we're trying to get at with these personality types. If it might not be your innate personality, you might need to take aspects of that innate personality and maybe shift it to, the rebel or whatever, that kind of sets an expectation that's a little bit easier for you to scale or succeed in business and that sort of aspect. So moving down the list, the rebel is another personality type. This is probably Elon Musk, I guess. He would probably consider himself the rebel. They like to, disrupt spaces that have already been developed. They like to be seen as revolutionary. The lover wants to create, really foster that intimacy and evoke really strong emotions. And then the ruler is driven by strong power and control. I think Rolex is an example of a brand that uses the ruler archetype. They like to show that they're on top, that they have the power, the authority to get what they want. So a lot of perfumes and high-end fashion lines use the lover archetype in their marketing. So this is a Coco Chanel ad here, and if as long as you use their perfume, you will get everything you want in the bedroom.
Man, easy.
Yep.
So again, just a few more here, and then we'll move along. This notion of this person that is a free spirit, lives in the moment, wants joy to fill their daily life, and then seeks those opportunities out kind of unrelentingly. A self-promoting person, someone that can leverage their skills as a means of transformation for others, and a kind of mysterious and magical moment that they can bring to those people's lives. And I think that's kind of an amazing skill to have as someone working in the creative field. It's not something that I have. I don't have that kind of showmanship, but when I've seen people that have it, I see how it draws others into the experience of what's being created or what's being sold. And it helps the viewer or the customer empathize or just get excited a lot of times. And then the sage, someone that has wisdom, maybe that old soul that has the right thing to say in those hard moments, is drawing from a deep well of experience sometimes, or just sometimes it's kind of intuitive knowledge about life, and they like to share that in the right moments. There's, starting in the early 2000s, it seemed like there was a trend of creating just completely ridiculous commercials that didn't really speak about the product as much as speaking to the experience of laughter and hilarity and kind of ludicrous situations, and the product was a secondary character in those moments. But especially with something like Skittles or Taco Bell or Doritos, they're accepting the fact this is not nutritious. It's not bringing quality to your life in terms of the food product, but it's fun, and it's embracing almost those negative aspects of the food to draw you in.
Yeah, the hook is that it made you laugh, and therefore when you're in the store in line with all the other products, you're going to think about the one that made you feel good or made you laugh or connected with you in that way. So
yeah, cool. So Nicole and I took a little time to put together 3 pairs of case studies. And as we look at these, I would like it to be as conversational as possible in this format. And we'll open opportunities for feedback and comments, or maybe moments of connection. So our first one is called Stew Develops Over Time. This notion that sometimes you just have to do the thing for a while and find your way to the understanding of what it is you want to be doing or how you want to be seen and known. And so I identified Birchwood Supply Co., owned by Jason Horinger, as a great example of this, especially someone that has a good sense of how to present themselves and a very unique voice in that realm. And Nicole is going to speak about Media 77, which is a videography company that is owned by her brother and has been developed over many years. So we'll start off with Birchwood. All right, so, oops. Darn my computer. Here we go. So Birchwood began in 2015. It was kind of a total jumping off the pier. Jason had been an educator at same high school I used to teach at for a long time. And due to a number of circumstances, decided it was the time to jump into this thing. He had a little bit of experience with a company that he and I had owned together, and he saw a vision for taking that much further and had developed a really strong eye and sensibility for the types of things that he was drawn to and that he saw there was a customer base for, and decided to go for it. And so at his core, he felt this emergence of creativity and a desire to kind of run towards that, and also this hyper optimism and hope for what could happen. I think his characteristic of the innocent really manifested itself in seeing the potential of things. And there was one reason that the company we had together, Retread Akron, that I realized I'm not cut out for this, because I have a very distinct ceiling on the amount of things I'm willing to accumulate, or my willingness to put up with kind of sitting on an inventory of stuff, waiting for the right person to come along and purchase it. And Jason has a bottomless, an infinite appetite for those things, and is always very excited about the things that he knows are special and desirable. And then that magic piece of matching a client with them.
Did he have much of a client base when he got started? Like, did he dig into his network to find the confidence to do this, or?
No, he had a very supportive family and friend base, and we had done a number of like craft shows, Cleveland Flea and that kind of thing together in the previous company. But it was pretty thin at that point when he jumped in.
Yeah, no, that's great.
So pretty early in the business, he realized that he needed to define the ways that he was serving a client base. And so that really started his route down the marketing path. And so he defined those things as found, and those would be the items that he was getting from auctions, from estate sales, and so on. Custom, things that were made specifically for the clients, sometimes out of reclaimed materials, but a variety of circumstances. And then raw materials, sourcing materials either from buildings that were being torn down or a lot of times other recycled materials, and providing those to people so that they could pursue their own creative route. And so by defining those three things, he was able to speak to them each and kind of serve those markets. And I think that leaned into who he is at the core, which is a caregiver. He's a person that wants to make people comfortable. He wants to create an environment of welcoming and togetherness. And this kind of started manifesting that part of his business. It also allowed him, as he began to build his Instagram, which is where he's very active, his Instagram presence, he was able to place his goods online in those contexts to speak to each of those three markets. And then where I think he really started to hit his groove was over a long period of time and a lot of challenge and disruption, even being moved out of that Richard's Florist space and coming over to Bounce, was a chance for a major reset. So that struggle, that real trial that he went through, was kind of a purging and a cleansing that forced him to reset, and helped him define these phrases that became mottos, or even kind of I would call them mandates of his business. This idea of take care of each other, start where you are, and then give a fuck. We're adults. Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
that's his third one.
Yeah, those are his mission, vision, and core statements, and they're slapped all over the wall. I mean, even just from the last slide to this slide, this one it's so much more of a curated, cohesive personality. Whereas the other one, it was nice stuff, but it was things in a room. Whereas this
Right.
It's Horinger.
Yeah. Yes. And so, and all of these photos are pulled from his Instagram account. What I really thought worked so well in these is exactly what Nicole just said. These are all the things he does in the context of each other with his messaging on top of them. And so it's impossible to look at anything he posts, and it's pretty challenging to look at anything he posts and not get a sense of the man's aesthetic. The business is aesthetic. Now, you may not know everything about everything that you're seeing, and you may not know which things have been made by him and which have been found. That's okay. Dig in a little bit. And if you're curious enough by seeing the things that are presented to you pretty quickly in his stories and in his feed, you'll figure it out. And so that really started to tap into his sage quality, which I would say is another very strong part of his personality, is this depth of soulfulness, and through life experience and some of it just intuitively, that his value of worn leather, of a tool that's been used so much that it's polished from use, wood that's worn down, those kinds of things, that warmth is translated then through the messaging that he carries forward.
Yeah. And I mean, so all of those icons that you have down, the innocent creator, caregiver, you look at those images and who's going to say a couch is a caregiver? Like that's not the point of this. It's the fact that he's using his own personalities to curate specific things to speak to an audience who will care about these products in the same way he does. He's connecting with them on a really emotional level by the way he's presenting his materials.
So this last slide for Jason's business for Birchwood, I left the screenshots showing a little more of his kind of the back end of his pages. In this image over here on the left side, left center, you can kind of see the grid of his images and how those things work together to very quickly tell the story. And please understand, I'm not saying Instagram's the end all be all. He doesn't own this platform. If Instagram shuts down tomorrow or creates restrictions, he loses that, right? So I would say it's like any sort of investment. You don't want to make sure that you're leveraging all of your stuff into one platform. Nurture those audiences in a variety of ways, but that's something we can talk about in other case studies here. So this is one example of how to get that message out there. Examples of life within the objects, his little pup, Walter, or he and his boys, those images help push forward something more than a product. That resonates with me because I'm not comfortable being in front of the camera. And that's not a part of my life that I necessarily want to share or think to share. And yet I know that it's effective in creating that connection with someone that's looking at the work. The other thing that I'm definitely not skilled at, but I admire in the Birchwood business, is how he's able to put together an authentic narrative in his posts. These are statements that he writes pretty often. They're not highly polished in the sense of like being corporate speak. They don't have a sheen to them. And yet you can tell they're very heartfelt and soulful. They come from a place of experience and connection, and they're consistent. And so there's a lot of interactivity that you'll see on his site, on his account, because people resonate with what's being said, and it's a place for them to respond in kind or to offer support. Jason, knowing Jason, I don't think he does that with a real ulterior motive, or maybe not as his first thought. But he does know that this is something that connects people and keeps them coming back. But it's also a need, and so going back to those personal archetypes, for me to write something like this would be a chore that would be painful and would take a lot of energy and effort. And I would probably drop off pretty quickly. So he puts in energy and effort into this, and it's fulfilling to him, and it also serves his business. And so I think with that, if anybody has feedback or thoughts about how that resonates with their business, maybe you have a similar practice, or you found other ways to connect with people that are not quite so vulnerable in that way? I'd be curious to hear that. And then at some point we'll move on to the second case study in this group. Does anybody have anything that they want to share or feedback on what we've offered so far?
I was just gonna say, Micah, I'm more on your end. I get caught up in the language, feeling like I have to make this presentation of it. That I end up deleting everything I just spent 20 minutes writing, and I never even make the post. Right. So, finding a simpler approach that feels more natural for me sounds like something I need to figure out. So,
yeah, it's a little bit of going back to the Nike and the Apple approach. Like, Nike is not going for that stressed out mom who's going to Walmart and picking up the cheapest pair of shoe. They're going for that target audience that is in love with Nike and will buy all of the equipment and keep coming back anytime they need equipment. And that's what Jason is doing with these captions. He's really connecting that loyalty. He's creating that loyalty and advocacy through those words. But just like Skittles, that's not the only way to do it. You can also be kind of silly with it and find that technique that really works for you, because then that's going to drive people authentically to you.
Yeah. It is funny. Matt, did you see your support is up here?
That's more the depth of my language there.
Yeah. But it speaks.
Yeah.
And I think to that point, if you're creating things out of old pieces of wood and you're collecting old, 5-star American flags and so on and selling those things, then it needs to sound like a folk song when you're writing your narrative. That's not the kind of work that I make. And Matt, knowing your work, it's celebrative. It is contemplative and spiritual, but it's colorful and rich and welcoming to people in a different way. And so, that voice that you share with your work should be completely different.
Yeah, you speak in hieroglyphics, it seems like. It's great.
Yeah, it's worked for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, so I want to talk about my brother, who is a videographer in Akron. So Adam has always been in love with movies and had a passion for making movies. I remember being kids and our uncle gifted us this gigantic, I don't know if it was gifted us or just kind of hand me down, this gigantic camcorder, the one that you had to put like a VHS in to record anything, that made your arm tired after 20 minutes. Clearly, I did not have the passion to carry that thing around. But Adam loved it and then kind of fell in love with this idea of directing and writing scripts and, creating stories visually. So he used that passion to go to Stark State to get a degree in film and video, and he graduated in 2010. So his goal was always to make these like super cheesy, well, I don't know if they're cheesy for him, but horror movies. I remember watching lots of them as kids, and we would kind of, like Jason's and Freddy's and all that kind of stuff and try to pick apart how they made the props. And while I was at CIA, taking some of the sculpture classes, I would take that information back home to him, and we would try to figure out how to make movie props so that he could, live out this passion. He would go to these Cinema Wasteland is a convention in Cleveland, and he had a passion of having one of his movies screened there one year, and so he crossed that bucket list goal a few years ago. So he's always going up to workshops in Cleveland to learn how to make these props. And anyway, so the point is that this is definitely a passion for him. He very much would call himself the creator. But these passion projects are expensive, and there's not really a guarantee that he'll get money from it after the movie is made, and bills are still due. And he, at this point, around this time of his life, he was getting married and having kids and wanted a house. So he needed some funds in order to fund these passion projects. and moving to LA or New York or some other place was kind of out of the question. So he bounced around between a lot of part-time jobs. He did a lot of factory work. I remember at one point he was stuffing vending machines around Akron. He had a couple of office jobs and realized that he is not an office person. So it was just a lot of replying to crazy Craigslist posts, but that gave him the money to make these movies. Eventually, he landed a pretty consistent gig with a wedding videography company, and the seasonality of that was really nice. It was enough to pay the bills, and then it gave him enough time to keep working on these projects. But in his mind, he has always been a movie director. He has a very, very clear vision of how to turn a project from an idea to a script to scout location, all that kind of stuff, to video editing and sound design. I told him about this presentation and that I was going to feature him, and his response was, well, a smart person would have put all their effort into weddings a long time ago, but that doesn't align with my truth. So he's still, after all this time, is still very much a horror movie director. So somewhere along the line at this wedding videography company where he was just freelance, he realized that his work was a lot better than the other videographers. And I think a lot of it had to do was with the fact that he has the cinematic eye. He is really great at kind of being the fly on the wall and capturing these moments, and gently directing people, and also being a super calm voice in a really chaotic environment. All of that really translated to a hectic day of the wedding and all that kind of stuff. And he started doing the math about, getting a fraction of the wedding payment. The rest of it went to the company, and that didn't really sit right with him. So he left that job and in 2016 started advertising himself on The Knot, where he could charge more for his wedding work, therefore had to do less of them, which meant more time for these movies. So if you go to the next slide, please. So in 2016, 2016 is when he started on The Knot. 2018 is when things really started taking off. 5-star reviews were pouring in on The Knot, and he was getting work without really having to advertise, which was great. And again, that cinematic approach is really what helped, I think, speak to so many people. He started winning a lot of awards from The Knot, which brought him more work. And all that sounds really great, except for the fact that that was taking up now the full year instead of just wedding season, which meant no time for his movies. But at a certain point, he had to kind of just accept the fact that he is a wedding videographer at this point, and that still, again, doesn't really align with his truth. But he needed money, and it paid the bills, and it worked out for a bit. But again, he's still really resistant to this being labeled as the wedding videographer. So at this point now, his wedding work is finally at a good place where he doesn't have to advertise at all. He's got a full year booked, in advance, which then allows him to start, that flexibility and stability is allowing him to start taking on more advertising work. So he's starting to do trailers for nursing homes, a lot of real estate, trailers and house showings and things like that. And he likes that work. The challenge that he's running into is that his portfolio, this is his Instagram and an image from his website, it's all wedding stuff. So the challenge he's kind of running into is unfortunately being labeled as the wedding videographer. All of these businesses are saying, well, your stuff is great, but all I see is weddings. So I had reached out to him to ask if he needed help with any of the wedding work. And he said that he's in a good groove with that, but he was kind of desperate to rebrand his website and his social media to kind of separate out. He needed a really thoughtful approach to separate out the wedding work from his video work, advertising work, because he wants to start pursuing that a bit more, but he just had no time to do that. So he needed an approach that wouldn't mean 2 different websites, 4 different social media handles or whatever. He needed a really strategic way to handle that. So as I was talking with him, it really struck me that he's never just been a videographer. He's always been the scriptwriter and the scout location and the sound design and just everything. It was never just videography to begin with. So if you change over to the next slide. So my solution for him was to sort of show him as this one-stop solution for a variety of industries. So going from that creator aspect and moving more into the regular guy. And it was funny, I did this archetype quiz with him, and I knew he wanted to identify himself as the creator, but I know my brother, and he's always been the regular guy, to be super unpretentious, very humble, gets along with everybody. And as he's answering the questions, he's like, well, I want to be that, but I'm actually probably more like this. And at the end of the results was the regular guy for sure. There was no real doubt about that. So in terms of how to kind of transition that branding for him, it's a lot more, even his logo we updated to be a little bit more general. His tagline from before was "Capture the Journey," which, it speaks to wedding work, but not it doesn't have to. And so instead, his new tagline that I came up for him was "Turn your story from real to real." So it kind of is generalizing a little bit more, speaking to a lot more industries, and kind of showing him as this filmmaker, producer, production shop instead of just videography services. And I mean, the benefit to that is the Knot is doing all the work for him. He doesn't have to advertise for a wedding. He gets it. He gets that without having to really try. So his website doesn't really need to scream wedding work either. It's there, it's listed on his website, but it's not on every single page. And then also kind of bringing through his personality. It's a lot of puns. I think his bio, his about me pages were straight shooters. So like, again, tying into the film aspect, but just trying to be that regular guy sort of mentality. I'm
curious. I'm sorry, Nicole.
Go ahead.
Did you have okay?
No, the only other thing I was going to say, if going back from the last slide to this one, his old website was pretty dark, and that was kind of an artifact from the movie. Yeah, it's all very, very dark and brooding. It was the horror movie aspect, and so flipping that to blues and whites, and still, it's still kind of showcasing. Like I think there's the movie props in one of those photos, but just making it a little bit more open and inviting to many different types of people.
Yeah. I'm curious if anybody that's in the session with us can think of a way that other people describe what it is they do as an artist, and like that skin crawling up the back of your neck feeling when someone tries to encapsulate all that you are into a word. And it's typically pretty inaccurate. Does anybody have one of those that they'd be willing to share?
I do. No, I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, t-shirt girl.
Yeah, that's it. That's all you are.
That's it.
Right. Like, Nicole, your brother, I think maybe like 6 years ago, I was like, man, I want to do some real art, less t-shirts.
Yeah.
But my website was like all the brand and the t-shirts and all that stuff. So yeah, I like got a new website and made it for art. And at first it felt really thin, but now it's like too full.
Yeah.
And I actually just like got rid of the old website, and now I just have a tab for that stuff on the art website. So like,
yeah, find a way. Yep.
Yeah, transitioning is weird. Like I'm still doing it.
And you will forever. It doesn't stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great one. Thank you. Yeah, I see Sid said whimsical.
Yeah.
Which it's like anytime somebody says, "Oh, you're an artist, that must be so fun."
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it is, but that's not the first word that I would use to describe it. Nor is it how I want my professional pursuit to be summed up, because I think a lot of times it might come down to not trusting that the person that's saying that is maybe saying it in a fully respectful way. like whimsical. It's like, I'm not sure you're saying that with the tone that I trust, you know?
Yeah, with marketing, I get, oh, so you do emails. Like, oh, yeah, if that's the one you want to think about, yeah, I do emails.
Wow. The other thing I was going to say with Adam is that in the last session a couple weeks ago, one thing she pointed out that I thought should be said in every maybe professional practice class for artists is that, you know, sometimes you have to have an income revenue that's not the thing that is your favorite. Mm-hmm. It's something you're skilled at. It's something that is worthwhile work, and it funds the things that you want to do, or it allows you to buy that piece of equipment. It allows you to do whimsical things. But that's okay. That, you know, she was speaking specifically about budgeting your year. You're kind of creating your calendar of budget and factoring in, okay, if I do that, how much time can that free up for the work that I want to do and need to do? I think that's a really healthy way to think about trading that time, doing something that's maybe not your artistic pursuit so that you can do your artistic pursuit. But then also having that discipline, I guess, to cap the time when everybody could use more money, you know. Mm-hmm. There's never enough of that. And so being able to put a lid on it when you know that if you go over your budgeted time for that money-making venture, that it's going to eat into the pursuit that you really want to pour your life into, and maybe the business that you're looking to grow. That's a challenge. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you. I'm looking at the chat here. Yeah. Virtual chaos. I love that. It's awesome. Cool. So we'll keep plugging through here. So refine to define. This next one that we're going to talk about focuses on developing your profile. I'm going to use specifically one design client, and then kind of reference another one. And I'll move quickly through this because I think it's pretty obvious. And then Nicole is going to talk about the development of her business, Educate Digital. So this is super fresh. The paint is still wet on it. Just a conversation I had yesterday with a potential client, but it was probably the most beautifully written creative brief that I've received from someone that was just kind of an off-the-cuff comment on what it is that they would like to have happen. So we don't need to read all of this together, but basically this was the statement that was shared, a part of the statement that was shared with me about the logo that they would like to have developed. And so I've taken that logo, this text block, and broken it into 3 sections so that we can look at it in the context of a business plan. So for instance, in this first statement, they say the logo will mostly be used for digital branding. They name the location, Squarespace, Instagram profile, etc. And then also on physical products in the form of laser engraving. So as the designer, that tells me so much information in that one sentence. That use case now, you know, as being knowledgeable in the programs that I'm going to use to create this, tells me how thin the lines can get to before they're useless, or how small this thing is going to have to still operate on when it's an Instagram avatar. I don't anticipate using large banners, blah, 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 but sees probably the likelihood of t-shirts, stickers, etc. So there's a merch potential as well, which maybe ends up being the same logo or an adaptation of the logo that can be used in those formats. When we translate that, this use description, I see it as equal to the desired markets or venues for your product. One of the things that Nicole and I kind of came upon in our planning conversations was that sometimes your marketing isn't working because you're trying to market yourself into the wrong environments. And so what is your best use case for what it is that you do? And I think if we went back to Birchwood, or we went back to Adam's company, those same questions could be asked and probably answered in the evidence that they've provided. Where does your work operate best? In what places do you want to make an impact? So, and I have a list of things there that I'll turn it back to myself. As a former educator, something that annoyed me was when people would call me a teacher. I loved teaching. It was really meaningful, but in my core, I'm an artist. When I left teaching and dedicated all of my time to being an artist, I found an openness within myself to find opportunities to teach. It's just, I learned about 2 decades into a career, finally, that I had inverted my priorities, that I needed to put major priority on the art making and living as an artist so that I could authentically and in my own terms, on my own terms, find opportunities to be a teacher. You may find that's the case in your own scenario as well. April, making t-shirts is important. It's a great venue for getting your work out there. It's an affordable way for people to own your work, but it doesn't need to be the lead horse, you know, for your business or the thing people know you for. This next part of the statement, ideally, I'd like 2 versions, a black and white simplified logo that'll engrave cleanly, especially in a small space, and a more detailed one, potentially with color, texture, weathered elements, and he references the initial sketches that were shared with me. So again, the aesthetic of the logo. How does that translate to a business plan, a marketing plan, ideal use, context, presentation of your product? So how should people use your work? Is it fine art for admiration, decoration, contemplation? Is it, do you want to renew public spaces through creating dynamic murals? Is it functional work for daily use? Is it a gift? And I think all of those things start to determine the price point of those objects. If it's a gift, it probably is going to have to be priced in a certain way for the Akron, Ohio market for people to actually take that object and give it away and so on. Okay. And then finally, there's a fair amount of sentimentality in having my wife's mom design this. She's designed logos and promo material for family in the past. So incorporating her original work as much as possible is a priority for me. So again, from a designer's point of view, it can be a little tenuous when someone provides initial sketches. In this case, they were really beautifully rendered. And now I know, because he's stated this, that I really need to stay close to that. I need to honor that sketch that was created, but make it scalable and make it useful in the formats that he needs. And then he ties in that they have this connection to Georgia and University of Georgia. They're Bulldog fans, so those colors are important for the logo as well. Again, this is not something that I typically get from a client. It's
I would say, no.
kind of like, I don't know, what colors do you like? And then you use colors and they're like, well, not those ones. Don't do that. So this is an amazing way to start this project. So personal connection to the logo, your personal connection to your artwork. How are you represented by your work? How do you communicate that connection to your audience? And how can that connection invite the viewer or buyer to form a connection? Okay. And I think of Birchwood a lot in this. That invitation to experience the work from another person's point of view, from the artist's point of view, can be very powerful. So one other tool that I use, and I've provided a link here, and I think this will stay live once Natalie shares this out after our presentation. I've created a client profile survey that goes through the who, what, and how of the company. So when I'm not getting a lot of content from a company that I'm going to do branding work for, we'll start with something like this so that they can complete this as a team. I'll give them a week or so to meet as a business and complete this survey. And what it does is start to collect interests, likes, dislikes, things I should stay away from, colors that are attractive, colors that are absolute no-nos, use cases, elements of the existing logo that they really like, things that they absolutely want to get rid of, and so on and so forth. And so that bank of information becomes a good starting point. It doesn't answer all the questions, and sometimes it can present some red herrings, but it can be a starting point. I think as artists business owners, it's a useful thing for us as well, just to generate that data for ourselves and kind of then take a step back and look at it and say, okay, what have I compiled here And how does this relate? How does this gel with how I'm presenting myself to the world? And maybe how people are talking about me. If I don't like what they're saying about my business or the words they're using to describe it, maybe I need to give them different words in a variety of ways. So again, this is something that you're welcome to use when the presentation comes out to you. If for some reason the link doesn't stay live when it's shared out, I'm happy to share that in any other way to get it to you.
Yeah, that's great. The only other thing I guess I ask my clients for the business side is I ask them, the first thing I ask them is, what was your greatest accomplishment in the last 18 months, and why do you think it was, why was it a success? And that really kind of, they're so used to thinking about things that are not working. So just kind of changing that perspective and getting them to think about something positive and why that energized them. I think that's really, it's a great starting point to then get them to thinking about who they are, and all the other questions that you had there. So.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about my business now. I won't go into my long, varied history of my work, my all of the different jobs I've had. But I will say that I had noticed this pattern at some point, that I kind of stay in an office job for about a year, and then I get frustrated with nothing actually getting accomplished. And I quit and kind of blow it up and go do an artist in residency somewhere until I realize I can't live on $5 an hour and I have to go back to an office job and save up a bit more. So the last office job I had, my husband and I moved to Austin the day that COVID lockdowns happened. So I was in the office for a day and then we went remote. I was working as the digital marketing specialist, so it actually kind of made my role a little bit more valuable because we had a transition to telehealth and all. It was for a healthcare company. But it was definitely a unique experience. And so the job I had was the digital marketing specialist for a private equity-backed healthcare company. And we would acquire these smaller clinics and transition them into our branding and everything. And so my job was really to help these business owners get out of their current marketing contracts, put them on our website, create the internal communication so that their staff knew that it was just a name change, but everything else was pretty much staying the same, communicating that to their clients. And in that process, I really started to see that there are three types of business owners. There's the business owner who is the jack of all trades and kind of either has had to or enjoys doing every single thing themselves. And they're kind of at capacity because they need to start letting go of some of that control, but that's the hard thing once you get that control. The other type of business owner is they might have hired a web designer off of Fiverr, which there's nothing wrong with that, but now they can't get a hold of that person anymore and their website is kind of held hostage and out of date. And they're really frustrated and have just kind of given up. And then the third type of business owner is the one that went all in and hired a giant marketing agency, and they're spending thousands of dollars a month. And when I would ask them, why are you spending so much on reputation management? What do you think that means? They would say, I never thought to ask. And it really just, it drove me nuts. Like I just found that there was such a communication gap and a knowledge gap happening. And the sage in me, I really got frustrated because it was a really quick, simple solution, just informing the business owners, giving them the tools to know what questions to ask to hold these marketing agencies accountable. But the marketing agency doesn't care. They get a client that says they want a website, they're going to make you a website. They assume that you've done your research to know that that's what you need at this point. They're not going to try to guide you into, well, a WordPress is way overkill right now. You can definitely get by on a Wix site. They're not going to give you that insight. And the business owner doesn't know anything, doesn't know the better. So at some point in that office job, I realized it was just kind of going downhill and it wasn't really meant for me anymore. So I decided to leave, and I was at this weird point where I could either go get another office job, knowing that I'd only really stay for a year, or I could bet on myself and see how far I got finally, and see how I could do on my own business. So a lot of my messaging in the beginning was very lingo heavy, a lot of marketing jargon. Looking at my notes to make sure I'm not rambling too much. Yeah, so I mean, initially I had a lot of success before that was why I asked you about Matt, what inspired him to kind of take that leap finally, or find that trust. I reached out to a lot of my network initially, and before I even started my business, and I kind of made a list of my 10 biggest cheerleaders and reached out and said, hey, I'm thinking of starting this business. When I'm ready, can I lean on you to send me some leads? Or, I have my sister's a massage therapist. She's got a studio. I said, can I put some brochures in your office? And that kind of helped me gauge of how quickly I could get up and running. And then I gave a lot of webinars for SCORE Small Business Association, and just gave away as much as I could for free. And that really helped in terms of getting a lot of clients right away. But a lot of the clients were very early startup stages. They might have, maybe they make cookies and enough people told them, hey, you can make some money off of this. And so they're starting to maybe dip their toes into having a business. So they weren't quite ready to quit their job or spend a bunch of money on marketing just yet. And I found that I was just doing way too much homework. I was doing all of their work. And I needed to update my messaging to set a clearer expectation that you need to be a little bit farther along in that process. So if you go to the next slide, please. So I started changing my messaging to really make it clear that it was a partnership, that my expectation of my client is that I need you to stay silly and give a darn. Because if I can't even expect that of you, then it's probably not going to work out. And now I know that that's a red flag. If I can tell in an intake call that it's really just me solving their problems without it being this dialogue, then it's likely not the right fit. And so the other aspect of this is that the clients I started getting then at this point were maybe a year or so into their process. So they were beyond the initial startup stuff, and now they're at that, they've hit the capacity where they need to start leaning on other experts to help guide them get to the next level. So it turned a lot into business development and helping them sort of understand that their marketing challenge is really more of a business development issue. You're not, the fact that you can't scale isn't because you only get 2 likes on Instagram. That doesn't matter. It's because you don't really have the process in place to service those clients if you get them. So a lot of my process with my clients turned into, it went from 1 month to about 6 months work before we could actually get to that website project. And it was really helping them define their target audience, figure out what a quality lead looks like, how to develop a sales cycle. And in that process, it is really rewarding. It kind of flipped from the sage into the magician, because I was able to help them understand how this thing they thought was really confusing and ambiguous and just an obstacle they couldn't overcome. And just with a few simple questions asked, their whole perspective flipped, and then they got really excited and they wanted to do marketing. And so a lot of my branding and messaging at this point speaks to the magician, where it's all these little pieces that make up a larger whole, which is where you can see on my Instagram there.
So can I ask you something, Nicole?
Sure.
Did you change when your business changed from being sage centric to the magician? And with that, would you call yourself a magician, or is that the voice that you're starting to promote in your business?
Yeah, for sure. I actually, the magician, I did this brand archetype quiz thing just last week, and I was answering the questions, and it made me laugh how much it connected to the magician because of the client testimonials I get and the feedback. I get a lot of comments like, man, you're such an idea interpreter, or I'm just so impressed with how you can take all my jumbled mess of ideas and turn it into something. And so it's them telling me that I'm that. I don't consider myself that. I can see how I am that, but I'm not really, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. That's cool. Yep.
Yeah, it's definitely from the feedback I'm getting. So yeah, I mean, it still plays into a little bit of the Sage, but when people understand the why, they kind of are hungry for more. And so when I can take something that seems really confusing and flip their perspective, it is really a transformative experience. I really like seeing that light bulb go off in their head. Something that seemed confusing is now really exciting. But at this point, it still was really business development heavy. It was that 1 month process. It turned into a 6 month process, and that was draining on me. I was at a capacity that I couldn't really take more clients like that. I needed to get quicker into that website development project, because if I personally do too much strategy work, my design brain atrophies and I feel really constipated. So trying to find that balance there. So now you can go to the next slide. So I'm really trying to simplify my messaging even further. I still find that using words like brand or marketing, it's still kind of ambiguous to people. And so a way to really hone in, I don't really use those terms at all anymore. Your story is your brand. I help you share it. That's marketing. And by narrowing it down and really honing it down to those simple terms that they already are familiar with, and there is no sort of anxiety around, well, I don't know what that word means, we can get so much faster into the website conversation. So again, this is also happening in real time. I'm still kind of learning who this is attracting and how it's working.
Awesome. So I think that's the first two case study categories, the Stu develops over time and the refine to define. It's this idea that over time, you start to identify the things that you do. You start putting words to those things to shape how people understand them. And then maybe the next step beyond that is reshaping it so that people look at the things, the valuable things first. They start to recognize the things that you value first and maybe your priorities first. I think that translates to artists pretty directly in terms of trying to promote the type of work, maybe the style of work that you're looking to get out into the world, by shaping words around it that cause people to think of those things when they think of you, on whatever platform you're using to present yourself and tell your story, advertise yourself.
Yeah, I mean, comparing, my story to my brother's story, Adam definitely worked really hard to fight against his, the moneymaker or whatever. But for me, it's the way I sort of approached it was I take an educated guess, I jump right into it, I listen to the feedback, and then I try again. It's a much faster iterative process.
Yeah. Cool. So our last one that we'll take a look at is analysis paralysis. I'm going to look at this from the standpoint of a kind of strategic exhibition design. And Nicole will talk about one of the clients that she's worked with recently, CeeLo Behavioral. So I see the development of an exhibition as a pretty good parallel with maybe planning a business and building the pieces of a business from the ground up. So that's kind of the framework that we're going to use for this, but I'll shift it back and forth from questions about your professional art practice and the exhibition. If you're a person that works in a format that doesn't exhibit in galleries, but prepares work and shows work in other ways, or records and presents music and so on, performance in other ways, translates this to that. So how do you approach a gallery exhibition? What are your first thoughts? What are your biggest concerns? What inspires you most about the exhibition? What do you want people to see, think, feel, remember? What are your limitations and weaknesses? I do want to take a moment with everybody and anyone that's willing to participate. What are your first thoughts when you land a big fish? Fill in the blank for yourself. Whatever format it is you work in, you got it. You caught the car. I was just talking to Mike Maris, who has a studio right above me, and he's working on this massive year-long sculptural piece, public art piece. And it's been a challenge. And one of the things he said is when the dog catches the car, he's got to figure out what to do with it then. And that might have been the goal, to land that big commission. But oh my gosh, once you do, now you got a whole other ball of wax to deal with. So I'm just curious to hear from you all. Where does your brain go? Where does your mind go when you get that opportunity?
Anxiety, someone said.
Absolutely.
Do I have the capacity for this?
Yeah, exactly. And that's such a hard thing, because it's like, do I have a choice to have the capacity? Like, that's going to pay bills for quite a while, or that's going to be a really prominent project that will probably land some other projects. How much sleep can I live on? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Logistical planning and timeline. So a person, Sid, the brain goes straight to planning and organizing. Okay. Overwhelmed. Absolutely. Isn't it interesting that for many of us, when we get the thing that we've been pursuing so long, our first reaction, maybe not our lasting reaction, but our first reaction is one of pain, kind of anxiety, overwhelmed, fear. A consideration for, do I actually even have time for this? And so rarely do these things time out in a way, even if you've applied for a grant or a project that looks like it's going to land right in the sweet spot of your schedule, the calendar never stays predictable. And so often these things land at the absolute wrong time. Okay. I think that's also true of like what Nicole was just talking about with when do you start your own business? When do you step into this thing fully? It's probably not going to be the right time, and it's probably, as exciting as the opportunity is and as real as it is that you want to pursue it, it's probably going to stir up a lot of feelings that are pretty negative as well. So with that, in my approach, when I get an exhibition or something like that, my first thing, much like Sid, is to go right to the planning phase. I find comfort in planning, comfort in preparation. And it doesn't mean that any of that planning necessarily is going to play out to the end result, but it is something to do. It's a way to channel the negative feelings into something that feels productive and maybe a step forward. I'll move on to this next slide. So in doing that, I find that I can create an atmosphere of free creativity by defining my boundaries. And it may be boundaries of what some of the people put in the chat there. Like, what is my capacity? Is it such that I've got boundless time and energy to be able to jump into this thing because there's so long before the show, there's a year before this exhibition takes place, and so I can really stretch this thing out and explore? Or is the show in 2 months and I can't pass this thing up, but there's absolutely hyper limited time to produce new work and I need to really prioritize? Funding. Maybe the show comes with a per diem or an honorarium of some kind. Maybe the commission is really generous in terms of being able to pay for the supplies and actually pay yourself on top of that. But often it's the opposite of that. And you have to decide, how many hours did I work in that side job so that I can make art? And how far can I drain that account for this show, for this opportunity? I think there's other things to consider in there as well. And again, maybe these run parallel to our own artistic practice, our own artistic business, and impact the way that we present ourselves and show ourselves to the world. So what are the potentials and limitations of the venue? What are the expectations of the gallery director? Did they approach you specifically because they like a kind of work that maybe you're not making anymore, or is not exactly even the way that you want to be seen? What's the timeline for production of the new work? What's your capacity for dedicating time to the new work? And considerations of quality of work, scale, material exploration. It costs a lot to mount a show. Experimentation, like, do you want to crank out the same type of work that you've been doing for a long time? Or is this an opportunity to try something new and really take a chance, even though that may not work out as predictably as the other things? Is there opportunity for collaboration so that new things can be made and new networks and relationships can be developed? So developing a creative brief for the exhibition so that you can strategically and efficiently use time and resources. I see this paralleling that excellent email that the client sent me that outlined everything. It kind of answers a lot of these questions. In the same way, we can do that for ourselves by taking the time to kind of do an inventory, maybe based on these questions or others, to before the making of art is even started, before resources have been expended, to have a really good read on our personal compass on what it is that we can do and want to do. To go back to the title of this case study, the paralysis problem, a lot of this pre-planning can lead to paralysis. It can become overwhelming, and it can be so satisfying in its process that it almost feels unnecessary to pursue the making of the work. So there is a danger in that. But again, if this is something that scratches your creative itch by being able to be a planner and be productive before the action takes place, it can also be really helpful. So I'm going to jump to the bottom here. How can you invite people into the process of the making rather than advertising the show, the mural, the craft show coming up, the album that's going to drop? Rather than advertising it once it's done, installed, ready to release, can you generate the interest and empathy for that project all along the way, in your style? You've got to decide where those boundaries are, how much you want to let people into your studio and into your practice. Maybe it's a hyper-personal time that is really sacred and, just cannot be presented to the public. But maybe there are small opportunities to invite people into seeing that work in progress. So in the strategic planning process, what's the theme of the show? Start that consideration process. I base this kind of flow chart on the way I work. So I'll consider themes, but I always think of like Christian rock, that if I dial in that theme before I've made anything, and I try to make all the work point back to that theme, it's going to be like a Christian rock album. It's going to be so literal, and it's going to be so obvious that it's just unbearable. So it needs to be thought about, but somewhere back there in the back. Make the work. Okay. In making the work, it's all going to come from me. And so it's all going to be connected to me. And so it's probably going to connect at some point. Okay. Collaborate. When I get the opportunity to collaborate with people, it's every single time when there's authentic collaboration and meaningful collaboration, it extends me well beyond what I'm capable of on my own and challenges me in that way as well. So when the opportunity is there, I definitely pursue it. You start to see that concept begin to form as that work in progress exists. Think, write, talk. When are those times that you think most clearly? When are you able to trick your brain to click off of like focused, anxiety-based thinking to something that's a little more subconscious? For me, it's almost instantly when I jump on the bicycle. There's a lot of stimulus at that point. Physical, I'm getting physically engaged. I'm paying attention to traffic and so on, trying to think of my destination. And that frees my brain just enough to find solutions. And those end up being some of the most fruitful times. So what is that for you? And how can you nourish that? How can you nurture that process? Writing, if that's a format for you that helps you get your thoughts out, awesome, or your ideas together. Talking with others. If you can find someone generous enough to lend you their ear and hear about your work and respond to you, that is an invaluable source. And then your work in progress. Step back from that stuff, see what's going on there, sort, edit, start to kind of prune the tree a little bit. Invite people to look at your work in progress, talk about vulnerable. That's not always comfortable. In fact, it's almost always uncomfortable because the work isn't finished, but try to do that in a way where you don't feel like it's hyper personal, where you don't have to layer on too much defensiveness of like, this isn't done. I'm going to do this, that, and the other. Get people's reactions and start to take notes on that. And you know what? Throw it away. If that wasn't worthwhile feedback, if they're not getting what you're going to be doing, it's okay. Put it aside. It was worth it just for the interaction. You took a chance, but you don't have to adopt all that feedback. That's your right. And then once that work is made, start to organize. I love making wall maps. When I had a chance to show at Summit Art Space a couple of years ago, that was something that helped me really organize what it was that I was trying to do. What are the places that these works will exist? And number one, just logistically, do I have the amount of work that I'm hoping I have to fill this space? And then what if I have too much? Okay, what are the pieces that can be trimmed? If I have to, what can I leave behind? What are the non-negotiables? These ones need to be showpieces. I want people to see that when they walk in the gallery, because it's going to set the stage for how they understand the rest of the show. So in some ways, thinking about it kind of like writing a book, what's the first page telling us? What's the first scene of the movie? And how does that set the stage for the way people feel as they go through the rest of this, time-based experience? Writing the artist statement is something that I am always uncomfortable doing. Trying to articulate something so ethereal into words is challenging. But if you can do that early enough, again, that's where you can lean on your community. I think that translates to your business plan or your marketing words, your language that you want to surround your business. Sharing that with people and having them bounce back to you is hyper valuable. And if that's something that you really struggle with, then hiring somebody is a great opportunity. That can be a one-off contract opportunity. Give them tons of notes. That could be on Fiverr. It's something Flaco Torres told me he does. When he needed to write a bio, he just compiled all the stuff that he knew was important, and he hired someone and he gave that to them, and they wrote this beautiful bio. And that's an awesome idea, because that bio there's nothing ethical saying that has to come from your hand. Save the energy and the mental strain for the things that are your art. Let someone else that's an expert in that field do their thing. But also at University of Akron, we have an arts administration graduate program. Those are people that are studying to do exactly that work in that field, and would probably really love to have an opportunity to exercise their skill and make a little extra money. The U of A writing program would be another one to tap into. Buy a cup of coffee for your local artist resource director and see if they'll sit down with you and talk through some things. And then the install. The install is an active process. And I think that's true of the implementation of your work, showing up at the craft show and setting up your table. Yes, you made all that stuff. Yes, you would love people to see all that stuff, but there may be some things that you decide to hold back because it's going to highlight other work. This is me being a complete hypocrite because I'm a maximalist and I want to show it all. I want all that stuff out there because I'm excited that I made it. I want people to experience it, and I want to just like fill a space. At the same time, I do know that when you leave some air in the room, when you leave some space on your table, it creates a spotlight effect and maybe even a scarcity mindset of like, oh, I better get that because there's not that many of them and I really like it. So being present in that installation process and understanding that there's still time for decision making. I talked about this a little bit already, and so I'm going to skip through it, but this idea of developing the environment, the way that you install your show, the way that you show your work, is hopefully considers how people experience it. And so setting those things up and again, translate that to the way you present your art business, your practice to the world. The way that you're setting it up directly impacts the way people experience you as an artist. And so if you wonder why people don't ask questions about your process or how it is that you make your work, what it is that goes into, your practice, maybe it's because you're not sharing enough about that, and it's sparking their curiosity. If they don't think, if that idea of whimsy, and if they're missing out on the kind of deep conceptual, really deeply rooted aspects of your work, you might have to let them into that a little bit to show that, hey, yeah, this can be playful, but it really touches on some deeply personal and deeply rooted aspects of who I am and who we are in the world. When do you provide answers? When do you keep mystery in your work? How does the viewer see themselves in your work? I think is really important to consider. How do they see themselves entering the work, but how do they, connect? Because we do tend to reflect back on ourselves in almost all situations. And so as the viewer, are you leaving space for them to step into the work and see themselves there, both in terms of exhibition and in terms of the way you're presenting yourself in a marketed format? So just one thought here as I kind of transition over to Nicole again. When it comes to developing your marketing strategy for your art practice, lean on some of the experiences that you've already had putting an exhibition together, designing a mural, creating an incredibly intricate piece of jeweled artwork, metalsmithed artwork. Those same steps of practice, those things that your brain creates almost like architecture before you even pick up a tool, because you're so skilled and experienced in those realms, are the same types of things you can exercise in presenting yourself to the world. But translate that from making of the physical object to constructing the words, ideas, presence, and personality that you want to put out there to the people that are viewing your work. So with that, I'm going to shift over to Nicole.
Yeah, so we're actually at time. I don't know how much more you want to go over, but I'm happy to kind of scrap this one so we can get straight into the resources.
Okay, let's do that.
Yeah, okay. And also, if you want to know about CLO, I'm happy to talk with people afterwards. Cool. I think if you can go back one or two more.
Oops, sorry. Oh yeah. I'm going the wrong way. Sorry. Come on, slides. Right.
Yeah. So I guess this slide is another opportunity for some participation. These were the 12 archetypes that we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation and then kind of sprinkled throughout our case studies. So we would really love to kind of kick this out to you guys and see just your gut reaction. What would you consider your archetype is right now? And then I will have a link to the quiz that you can kind of see how much that remains the same. So if you want to answer in the chat or just shout it out, which one of these speak to you right now? Yep, that's about right. Okay. Yeah, yep. Definitely. Yep. And that's, you're going to come to find that it's probably not one, you're going to have to adapt quite a few. Yep.
It is probably the best tool as a small business owner, though, to be kind of the Swiss Army knife, yeah. Personality wise. As a person that tends to be pretty codependent.
Yeah.
That's where I am too. I'm like, what do you want me to be? Yeah. I'll be that. Will it make it easier on you?
All right, well, we can move on if you'd like. Yeah, because I know it's a difficult ask, but I have a solution for that. The next slide here is, this is the link to the quiz. There's plenty of them online. This is the quiz I found that doesn't require you to give them an email address or anything. It's completely free and it's about 5 minutes. And it's really just one of those like personality, which Harry Potter character are you kind of a thing, but it helps you start thinking about, what are your core values and how does that translate to a brand? So that's a free resource that you can use. And then if you go to the next.
Yeah, and that'll be in the slideshow, and Natalie shares that out.
Yep. So in terms of kind of taking all this information that we've shared and turning it into a marketing and branding messaging strategy for you, the way I would kind of lay it out is go through that that link from the last slide, figure out what your core values are, and what archetype you can sort of start to use as a framework. And then the next step would be to start to identify your target audience, or the type of areas that you want to show your artwork at. If it is craft fairs, that's very different from gallery shows and things like that. So start figuring out where you want your work to live. And then maybe after that, take that personality tape quiz again and see how that might change with that new lens, taking yourself out of the spotlight and putting your target audience in the center of the story. So HubSpot has a free interactive tool. This is business branded, but I think that the resources can still be applicable. But this is another free resource that helps you build that persona. So like I was mentioning with Nike and Apple at the beginning of this presentation, how we're able to think pretty clearly about this fictional character of who their target audience is. This tool helps you start thinking through that. So what's their education level? How do they consume information? What are their challenges at work? What are their goals and things like that? It helps you start to create this fictional avatar.
Awesome.
Then once you have those few pieces, this is a book. I rented it from the library, so you can as well, or you can purchase it. I think it was only about $10 or so, but this was a really great resource that I found as a way to build your story brand. So again, taking yourself out of the center of the focus and putting your target audience in the center, putting them as the hero, and then trying to communicate directly to them helps you start to build this messaging. And then the last one, I just published a book that helps you take all of your brand and all that kind of stuff and turn it into a marketing strategy. And if you email me, I'm happy to send you a copy. But it helps you start to create a strategy around, what's realistic, how many social media posts in a week is realistic for your time, and all that kind of stuff. And then just really helping you understand that if you want to grow, it's okay to say no. You don't have to take every client that kind of drives you nuts. And being okay with what your personal truth is versus in a business space, and making sure that your bills are still getting paid, but you can still be happy.
That's a trick.
Yeah.
I compiled a few things that I think would be worthwhile here in the Akron area. So Natalie, when does the Artist Launchpad sign up go live? Do you have a sense of that? Either season or?
Yeah, probably in late February or early March, with the program starting in early April.
Awesome. And the cohort that participated last year, it was valuable beyond, I think, what was predicted. So that would be well worth being a part of. The Akron Soul Train, in conversations I've had with director Peta Brooks over the past few weeks, she's really desiring to have that be a hub, not only for the artists that are chosen to be residents on their calendar, but the Akron art community as a whole. She wants that to be a place that people can come to talk, to learn, to look at art, but also to find opportunity. And that's something that she's bringing from her experience in Cleveland at Spaces and wanting to really invest in here in Akron. So I know she's open to those conversations, as is Meryl that she works with there. Oh, cool. The one-on-one speed coaching in February will be really awesome. Yeah, I'm excited to learn more about that. The Small Business Development Center here at Bounce on the 6th floor, I believe, is super valuable, especially if you're looking to set up your LLC or S Corp, or you're just like, what the heck? I don't even know what to do with that, which is the position I was in a couple of years ago. And it's free. It's a free resource. They led me over the course of an hour-and-a-half meeting, led me right through the process of the paper I needed to file and helped me through that. So I felt comfortable and had a logic for my approach, which was just some of the nitty-gritty stuff that really stressed me out. that didn't allow me to do the things that I'm good at. And so being able to sit with those professionals was incredible. And there are more resources there than I've taken advantage of. So definitely look into that. I think there's also the opportunity to create your own artist salon. You're not alone in the struggles of running your practice, looking for opportunities, trying to develop funding, and figuring out how to market yourself. And so inviting other artists and art-oriented professionals to come together just to have those conversations, at the very least, can be a point of connection and camaraderie, but I think can quickly develop into something that is shared practices, shared struggles, and then solutions as well. And is something that we need in Akron. We don't really have that kind of community. And then, as I mentioned, with having people come on board to help maybe write plans and bios and all that stuff, hire someone. It's it seems intimidating to hire a marketing professional, but it doesn't have to be a monthly contract. It doesn't have to be a long-term relationship. It can be something to get you launched off the ground a little bit and give you some tools to work with. And so that's something that I would investigate as well. We are well beyond time. So, but I'm not in a rush to go anywhere. So if anybody has questions or thoughts that they would like to share, absolutely. If you got to jump off due to other commitments, completely understand that too. Cool.
All right. Well, I just want to say thank you so much, Nicole and Micah,
nice.
for sharing all of your generous time with us tonight. Your expertise is truly invaluable. And of course, thanks to everyone else who tuned in this evening and helped make it a really enriching workshop. I did want to just recap a few things that we accomplished this evening. We reviewed essential questions to ask yourself that will get to the authentic elements of your story, discussed branding archetypes to leverage in your storytelling. We reviewed case studies of branding examples and how they have evolved. We had a reminder that branding is your story and sharing it as marketing makes it a little less scary. And we utilized the analogy of planning an exhibition for how to structure and present your artistic practice. So thanks again for a great night. And we hope to see you guys soon at another Summit Art Space program.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.